This webinar is called Build Your First Data Project. And in it, we're going to talk about, okay, so you've done a little bit of learning to meet your data learning goals, and now you're ready for that first project. It can be a little intimidating, so I'm going to share some tips and tricks and best practices for you. So who am I? My name is Anna Strahl. I am a senior course developer here at Dataquest. And before this role, I taught high school math in the United States for 8 years, and then spent 3 years working as a data analyst. So I call this job like my perfect blend of those two roles, because I get to teach, but I also get to play with data all the time. So today we're going to talk about why projects are so important for your learning experience. We'll do a couple of project demos, really short project demos with Python and SQL. We'll talk about how to troubleshoot for projects, and then publishing your project, getting feedback. And then if we have time, we'll talk about picking your first project. And if you do have questions specifically for me or the Dataquest team, please use the Q&A panel to ask those, because if you put them in the chat box, they might disappear amongst the conversation. But if you think it's a question one of the other viewers could answer, please do feel free to ask that in the chat. So the importance of projects. If you have started your learning experience with whether you're doing programming or you're learning a new tool for your stack, projects are the bread and butter. We like to estimate that our students should take about 30% of their time learning new skills, and then 70% of the time applying those skills in projects, because projects are really where you test your understanding. You apply skills, you combine concepts that maybe you didn't have an opportunity to combine when you were learning the skill in a gentler, more isolated exercise. And if you are seeking a job in the future with these new skills, this is where you start building your portfolio, and having some really good projects means that you have talking points for interviews. For me, this was definitely the case. I was working on some projects, and when I had an interview, I was able to articulate the challenges and successes I had through my project, even though at the time I hadn't had any data experience in my career, because transitioning from high school math teaching, I didn't work with Python. All right, so we are going to do 2 small project demos today, but as we do, I would really like to know what data tools or programming languages you're currently learning or are hoping to learn. So if it's Python, go ahead and share that. If it's Excel or Power BI, Tableau, go ahead and share that in the chat, just so I can make sure the demos I'm doing today are for the correct audience. Okay, we're seeing a lot of Pythons, SQL, some Rs. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of Pythons. Please do keep working on those in the chat. But we're going to transition to the first Python project you will encounter in several of our paths. Maybe you've already worked on it, or maybe you're approaching it and you're a little nervous about it. So in this project, you are looking at a data set of app data from the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. I'm an Android person. I think that's what it's called, the Apple App Store. And the very first thing you see when you click into the project is this environment, Jupyter. And I remember when I saw Jupyter for the first time, I was a little intimidated because it was different than the traditional Python coding screen for lessons. So I do want to run over or run through some basics for Jupyter that will help with the somewhat, not steep learning curve, but it can be. And this project does take you to, or no, I'm sorry. Before this project, there is a full Jupyter tutorial walkthrough in several of our paths, so it's a gentle introduction to Jupyter. But here's the crash course. So in Jupyter, we have two kinds of cells we can use. The square is a cell. We have code cells and markdown cells. Code cells, that's where you write your Python. You can use Jupyter with other programming languages, but Python is what I see it most used for. But I saw some R users in the comments. I think you can do R with this. I'm not an R person myself. So if we wanted to write code, let's do a good old classic here. Print statement, hello world. And to run this code, we have a couple options. We can click the run button, and we see it prints right underneath that cell, and we get another cell that populates underneath. So if we want to print something else, and we click run, we get output under each individual code cell. Now, you'll notice that numbers populated. These numbers show the order of execution that has happened. So if I rerun this top cell, we can see it now has a 3 next to it, meaning it was executed third in a sequence. And this is really useful when you have a ton of cells you're working with, because if you have one cell that's dependent on another cell, running them in the wrong order will not work very well for you. So for example, if I say x equals test, and then up here I say print x. If I try to run this, it doesn't know what x is yet. And in fact, if we even switch this order, and I try to run it here, it's still going to give me an error because we haven't run this cell yet. So I have to run it, and then it'll successfully store the variable and we can print it. Now you can see my numbers have continued to increase, and for whatever reason, if you need to reset, have a blank slate, you can do that by restarting the kernel. The notebook as a whole uses one kind of brain or kernel, and you can restart and clear output. And then the numbers go away. If we try to print X now, it doesn't have it stored anymore. So those are the code cells. But what makes Jupyter really great for projects is markdown cells. And markdown is formatted text. If we want to write a title for this project, so I think that's the first step in the guided or in the instructions is add a title. So let's call App Store project. And you'll notice that there's no symbols on the side here. That's a good visual clue that you're working with the markdown cell instead of a code cell. If we click run now, we see it renders as text, and then we have a cell underneath it. No error, even though it wasn't stored as a string or a variable or a number, like it is just text that saves. But the cool thing about Markdown is you can format it. So if we're doing a title, the best way to do that is with the pound or hashtag symbol. And you can see right away the text increases in size. And if we run that cell, now we have a nice title font. I won't go through all of the Markdown syntax in this call because there's a lot of it, but I do have a good link to Markdown documentation that I'll share a little bit later. But don't get overwhelmed with it. I think if you know how to do some titles, do some text, that's a great starting point. So we have our project title, and now we want to do a description. So in another Markdown style cell, I'm going to write, this is a short description of my project. So the first thing we need to do in most data projects is to get the data sets into our tool of choice. So at this point in the learning path, students have not learned pandas or any other tools like NumPy. So the way that we're going to import the data is using the CSV module. So let's go ahead and import that from CSV import reader. And we can see that run successfully. I usually like to have all of my import statements in their own dedicated cell at the top of my project, so that if anyone's trying to run my code and they need to install any dependencies, they can see them all right there without running the project halfway and then getting an error because there was another module imported they didn't realize. Okay, so let's go ahead and convert what we need to convert. So write a code comment here, importing Apple data. So or not while with. And if this is unfamiliar to you, basically what I'm doing is within a context managing block, that's what the with statement is doing. I am opening a file using the reader function, and I'm using a context manager to just handle the file a little more securely and ensure that it doesn't crash Jupyter or my computer if the file remains open. This automatically closes the file at the end of the block. And then let's say, okay. And then Apple headers equals. And then if we print Apple headers, let's see if we're successful here. So I am looking at we're making a list of lists because a CSV is going to be imported as a list here. And then creating a list of those lists means that we can use index or reference by index. So the first row, which is index 0, will be all those headers in the data set. So if we print this now, let's see if I was successful with my code. We see all of the headers here. All right, I'm going to pause just really quick. If you have any questions about what I've done so far, before I get too far away from this, I'll take a moment if there are any questions. And as you guys ask those questions, I will work on adding another cell. To add another cell, I'm going to click this plus button. And I'm going to do a similar thing for the Google data. Copy and paste, save me some work. And Google Play Store is the file name. Oh, that's a great question. Where is the CSV file location? So because this is within our environment, we do the hard part of getting the files in the correct location. Let's see if we can open the files here. So yeah, if you do want to check what files are available, you can go to open, and this takes you to the associated Jupyter environment, and you can see basics is the name of the notebook that we're working on. Ignore untitled, I was working on that yesterday. And then our data sets are located here. And if we click on them, we can see a whole bunch of CSV text that isn't rendered very prettily because Jupyter. But that was a great question. I know when I switched to working locally, that was a big headache for me because I didn't know where to keep my data sets compared to my Jupyter notebook. And there's a couple ways you can handle that, but the easiest thing, in my opinion, is to keep your data sets in the same directory or subdirectory, aka folders, as the Jupyter notebook, so you can reference it by name instead of having to get the file path. But really good question. Is the notebook available on the Dataquest platform? Yes. So within the project, everyone will start out with an empty notebook called Basics right off the bat. And once you have that, you have a couple options. If you want to check the solution file, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but that's okay. You can look at the solutions in most notebooks with the toggle up here that says solution, and it will take you to the Dataquest solution repository, where, spoiler alert, all the solutions for all of our guided projects are located here. So you can see a demo or a sample solution here. And you can download these. You can download this file so you can run it locally. And same with this, you can download your Jupyter notebook so you can share it or work on it locally. And you can also download the data sets. So if we wanted to download the Apple Store data set. Oh, we wanted to join hands-on, got it. We're not going to go through the full projects today, but we will be having project walkthroughs in November, so keep an eye out for that. So you can download here. All right, so I was trying to multitask. Let's see if I was successful with my Google data import. All right, looks like it was. So we're not going to go too much further into this particular project, but I do want to show you how to do some troubleshooting, especially if we're working in a Jupyter notebook. So let's say I don't know, made an error typo when I was trying to import my data file. If I run it, we get an error specifically for that cell. And it says file not found error. And similar, if you are a Python user and you have debugged before, it kind of gives you an arrow to the line where the problem is. Jupyter does the same thing. So it's telling us the problem is with this line. And there's no such file or directory as Google Play.csv. So if you already see your, oh, thank you, Dataquest, for sharing that project in the chat. So if you do want to look at this project, that link will take you to where I am. And I am on screen number 2. So I'm going to see if some AI assistants can help us with this. I'm going to copy the error and then click the help button and ask Chandra AI tutor. And this tutor is trained specifically on Dataquest content, so it's a little smarter, quote unquote, at helping with Dataquest specific content than a generalized large language model or AI chatbot would be. So if we submit, let's see what happens. This error usually occurs when the file is not in the same directory as your Python script, or the name is misspelled. Here are a few things you can try. Make sure the file is in the same directory as your Python script. We know it is because of that great question we had. So that's not the problem. If it's not, you'll need to provide the full file path or full path to the file. Check the file name for typos. Is it googleplay.csv or googleplay.csv? So it's actually offering a suggestion here. which isn't correct, but we didn't give it enough information to predict that correct name. And this is a good one to know, especially my Windows users. I'm a Windows user, and sometimes file path names can get really muddled and confusing. So this is a good one to know for if you're working locally, for making sure you know where you are on your computer. So this kind of solved it. Chandra told us, look for typos. And that was, in fact, the issue. What was the accurate name? Store. Okay. A few other things I want to point out for if you need help is we have a really great community at Dataquest, which is learners, and we have community moderators, course developers like myself, and our engineers sometimes pop in to answer questions as well. And especially with our beginner projects, there are a ton of conversations about them. So if you have a question, you can probably find the answer. But if someone hasn't asked that question yet, please ask that question in our community so that others who have the same question have that resource available in the future. And then I gave a sneak peek at this earlier, but looking at the solution isn't cheating, especially with guided projects. They are meant to be more challenging than the lesson exercises because there's less guidance. For example, look at the first instruction we're given for working with code here. We're not given a whole lot of direction on how to open and read files. And there's a little bit here, but it didn't tell us about the reader function. It didn't explicitly tell us how to import the module. So that's knowledge you're either keeping from, like, pulling from your brain, or if you forget how to do it, you can Google it or ask for AI help. When I was a Dataquest learner before I worked here, and I spent so much time Googling with Stack Exchange and Stack Overflow to find answers from other Python users that were directly related to what I was doing. And I learned a lot through that process. All right, so we're going to move on from this project now. And from Python, we'll do a quick SQL demo. So SQL projects are a little different because unlike a Jupyter Notebook, where you have coding cells and markdown cells, SQL projects, you have comments and queries, and that's kind of it. Oh, actually, I forgot I wanted to show you one more thing about Jupyter. This is another project in our data analyst and data scientist with Python path. And you can see the Jupyter Notebook environment looks a little bit different. And that's because it's not Jupyter Notebook, it's Jupyter Lab. And this is kind of the more updated version of Jupyter. And I'm showing you both because in the wild and on Dataquest and in other places, like, you'll probably see both forms, and it's good to be familiar with both. So Jupyter notebooks, like we were working with, the interface is a little more structured with headers up here. And to open other files, we had to go navigate to that open dropdown. But in Jupyter Lab, you can see all of our files are saved in a panel here on the sidebar. So if we wanted to look at our data set, oh, it's not UTF encoded. I think that's a Windows issue. But if we were to run it in, oh, it's not a Windows issue, it's a lesson component. In the lesson, they actually tell you not to use UTF-8. So you can use the correct encoding within the Jupyter Notebook, and it will read in that file so you can read it. And the launcher is kind of cool because in addition to opening a new Python Jupyter Notebook file, you can play with things like a strict Python file, .py, instead of .ipynb. You can play around with the terminal. You can do a markdown file without any coding cells. So there's a little bit more flexibility. The interface here works the exact same as what we saw with the kind of older version of the Jupyter Notebook. So there's code cells and there's markdown cells. We are working on transitioning all of our guided projects to Jupyter Lab, but that's taking a little bit of time. So in the meantime, it's good to see both. Okay, now that we've done that, let's talk about SQL. So this project, if you're wanting to follow along, I'll extend my screen here a little bit. If you type in app.dataquest.io/m/600, that's where you can get to the same lesson as me. So I chose this project because it's encouraging users to actually work locally with SQLite. I know when I learned SQL, I breezed through all of the lessons and the associated exercises, but I didn't work locally at all. And I felt myself being limited when I went to interviews because I didn't feel like I had as practical SQL knowledge as I could have. So I really encourage you to challenge yourself to work locally with SQL. SQLite makes it very easy. If you try to download a different database, like Postgres, the installation's a little more involved. So for a beginner, SQLite is great. And it's pretty easy to install. Our first guided project here. Thank you, Dataquest, in the chat for sharing that project. We share a link where you can download SQLite, and if I remember correctly, the installation's pretty quick, pretty straightforward. If you know how to install an application on your local machine, you can install SQLite. And I've already done that. So here is SQLite. I have it open in the same window, but it's not the internet. It's a local application for me. And I've opened our database here, which can be downloaded from the lesson. And to do that, I then opened the database, which took me to my file explorer, and I selected the database. I see someone's raising their hand. If you can ask that question in the Q&A, I will work on answering that for you. So SQLite is really cool because you can actually preview all of your data a lot more easily than you can in the lesson environment. You can see all of our tables are in a drop down here. So for this project, we have how many tables is this? 8 different tables. Currently, we're looking at customers, but if we click on offices, you can see the table is much smaller. There's fewer office data points. And on the side here, we also get an overview of each table with the table name and the column/attribute names. When I first downloaded SQLite, I wasn't quite sure how to write queries. It's over here in another tab, Execute SQL. And it takes you to a query writing environment that's similar to the lesson environment, where you can write your query here and it will output on the bottom. So let's write a quick select all from customers, but I'm going to limit that to the first 5 rows. And to run it, you can click the play button and we can see the first 5 rows of our customers table down here. So let's go back to the project for a moment and see what our first task is. Okay, so we loaded the database. There's a good little visual here if you want help with that. And it gives us the database schema. All right, so this is an interesting first challenge where you're basically tasked to give an overview of all the tables within one query's output. So you can see the table name, the number of attributes, and the number of rows for each table. So let's go ahead and work on this. And the way we're going to do this is start with select. And let me get my notes here just to make sure I get this right the first time. Actually, before I do this, let's write a comment just to make sure our future selves and any other potential audience knows what we're doing. So we'll say this is the model car project, and then this first query is from screen 3. And let's say gives an overview of the tables. Write comments. Your future self will thank you, guaranteed. All right, so select. And to do this, we're actually gonna use a string of the table and create a first column that isn't present in any of the data sets. So you can see here, what I'm doing is I am selecting customers as a table name. And now this is, in my opinion, the most clunky part of this particular query is we have to manually type in the number of columns. And we can do that by counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Great. As number of columns. Oh, I need a comma up here. And then finally, we can count all the rows for our rows as num rows. And we're going to have to specify where we're pulling this information, and we are doing that from customers. All right, so if I run this now, we can see our cool little hack is paying off here. We have the table name that we specified here in the alias, the string value customers, our number of columns, and our number of rows. So now we're going to do the same thing for the next table and kind of glue it onto the end of this output table using union all. If you haven't learned about union all yet, don't panic. It's a way to join different information together. All right, so our next table is employees. So remember, this is just a string. It's not referencing the table. And in fact, if we run this right now, we can see that it's saying the number of rows is 122 because it's still looking at the customers table. This is just a string. Okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 columns or attributes. I see a question in the chat. Is this webinar recorded? It is recorded and it will be shared via email tomorrow. So if you missed anything, you can take a look at it then. Oh my gosh, there we go. Okay. There we go. And now if you run this, we can see the number of rows is counted differently because the employees table, we can browse the data to take a quick peek. The employees table is much shorter than the customers table. So We would repeat this process for each table in the database, but for time's sake, I'm not going to do that. But this is a really good one to get some practice with if this is an interesting query for you. But what I want to do now is I want to show you what to do next. Let's imagine you finish these beautiful projects. You finished the Python project, you finished the SQL project. What do you do next? We talked about troubleshooting as a reminder. We talked about Chandra chat. AI support is not cheating, especially if you're trying to debug. I use AI to help me debug all the time. You can peek at the answer by looking at the solution file, and you can ask the community. Helpful links. Okay, I'll pause here for a minute in case you want to quickly jot down these links. The first one is for that markdown text formatting. It's a cheat sheet for all of the common markdown syntax. You can do headers, you can do bold text, italic text, you can add in links, bullet points, images, really anything that you would want to format in a text document, you can do with Markdown. The next one is a Jupyter Notebook tutorial. If it is a new tool for you, this tutorial walks through everything that I did, but also goes a little bit more in depth about how it works and what else you can do with it. And the final one is the download link for SQLite if you want to download that locally. This link is also present in that guided project. Thank you, Dataquest. That's a great link. Okay, so sharing your project. This is probably going to be the final thing that I chat about, but I think it's the most important thing, so it's a good one to end on. Once you complete a project, share it. Even if it's just for yourself, having all your projects in the same space will really help you be able to go back and reflect, to refine. And then when you are ready to start building that portfolio, you'll have all the skills to work with tools that can otherwise have a somewhat steep learning curve. So GitHub, if you haven't heard of it before, it is somewhat industry standard for sharing code in particular, but GitHub can have a lot of associated learning with it. There's a lot of syntax, repositories, push, pull, fork, clone. When I saw that, I did not know what it meant. I think I spent hours trying to just upload my first project to GitHub, and I did it in a very roundabout way that was not good practice. So for beginners, especially for beginner level projects that you probably aren't going to show to a potential employer, I really recommend GitHub Gists. It's the same account, so once you sign up for one, you'll have Gists available to you and regular GitHub available to you. It's free. This isn't sponsored or anything. It's just industry standard, so highly recommend and encourage it. So let's go ahead and look at what Gists can look like. This is my personal GitHub. That's my cat, Babs. And I created gists of the two projects that we worked on together. So this first one here is our Python Jupyter Notebook of the profitable apps. And you can see it shows the cells that we did, both markdown and coding cells, and it shows the output. So if you are wanting to share this with friends, family, colleagues, you can walk them through your process right here. And then I also shared a version of that SQL project. And you can see both are formatted correctly. It has the correct keywords highlighted with a different color. So I'm going to show you how you can actually create a gist. It's very simple. This plus button in the corner, create a new gist. And there are, I think, 2 fields to fill in. A gist of 3 fields. A gist description, the file name, including the extension, and then the code. So let's do the Python project. So profitable apps project demo. And then if you want to do a Jupyter notebook specifically, IPyNB is the extension. If you do .python, that's not going to render your markdown and output cells correctly. So you want to make sure you have .IPyNB. Now to add a file, this is not the way. So you can either copy and paste your code over here, or let me open my file browser here. I'm going to drag and drop the solution. Let me see. Momentary pause, my apologies. There we go. So basically what I did was I downloaded the notebook that I was working on, and then I dragged that file over, and you can see it automatically populated with something. This is what Jupyter Notebook looks like if you click on raw file. It's kind of the back end. This is what the computer reads in order to render correctly. So if you're trying to upload a notebook to a gist and you're like, oh, what's going on? This is what's supposed to happen. And now you can either create a secret gist, will be private just to you, or you can create a public gist. And right away, we can see that's all rendering for us. If we click raw, that's where we get that funky looking text. Now, this is why I really like gists, is people can leave comments on your code. So if you're looking for feedback, you can share your gist link and say, hey, please write a comment with any feedback you have for me. And feedback, which we'll talk about in a minute, is really, really valuable for improving. Now, you can also revise your code in gists. This is kind of beyond this webinar, but this is where you can see git diffs, meaning what's new, what's changed. So to revise an existing gist, you can edit it and then directly edit the code here. All right. Oh, that's not my gist. That's all gists. There we go. Okay, and finally, if you do want to work with kind of traditional or regular GitHub, you can do that. But like I said, I don't encourage that for brand new users because you have to use a repository. However, if your project has multiple files that interact with each other, meaning you want to have a folder for it, gists is limited. So that's where you want to use the traditional GitHub environment. All right, so the final thing I want to touch on is getting feedback. So feedback is super important because anything that you're unsure about, somebody can provide some guidance, or maybe there's things you didn't realize you could improve about your project and somebody points it out to you. This was really valuable for me when I was a learner, and I'm going to show you how valuable it is to our current learners by going to the Dataquest community. You can share your projects in the community, and our moderators are super good at providing feedback. So this student, Dimitar, shared a project about Star Wars trends. And you can see one of our community moderators, Meha, gave some really good feedback. And Dimitar has actually shared several projects, and each one he has refined and improved based on the feedback he's received. For example, if we look at his project, here's the beginning of his Jupyter Notebook. And we can see he has this really cool table of contents that links to each section in his project. Including a table of contents was a piece of feedback he got on one of his projects. So he's improved and implemented. So if you're not part of the Dataquest community, this is my plug to definitely do that, because it's free and you get free, really valuable, insightful feedback on any of the projects you share. So you can see Dimitar's project is really cool. He has some really beautiful visualizations about Star Wars movie rankings. He has a really good write-up in a markdown cell with some formatting of the insights for each component of the project. And if you want to check this out, it is shared in the Dataquest community. He was one of our community champions and project spotlights, which means we shared his project with the Dataquest world because we thought it was so cool. All right. And you can see you can do a lot of really cool formatting with Jupyter Notebooks. All right. So if you are ready for this first project, you can actually filter and sort for your guided projects that are at your level with the tool of your choice. And to get to here, I will show you really quick from your learning path. You're kind of on your main page for your Dataquest account. If you go to projects, I recommend guided projects for your first project. And then you can filter them. So beginner level, let's say we want to do a Python project, and you can see several beginner-friendly Python projects. And you can kind of see what's involved with them. This is another one that I really enjoy for beginners because it uses skills like variables, lists, loops, conditionals, and doesn't require a whole lot of additional library knowledge. So if you're looking for one extra to practice, maybe you've already done the beginner projects in the data related path, this is a fun one.